I've just seen like so many videos from Sunnis, Shias, that the highlight and purpose of your existence is just to pray. And that's why, like, once you start to question the validity of all these things that attach and ensnare themselves upon the Qur'an, you start to realize what the whole thing was. There's got to be some kind of unseen connections that are made with anything you do. Like we do have these unseen forces influencing us, and we interact with it whether we know it or not. The salat ritual is clearly called salat for a reason, because what this salat thing is not the ritual, but the ritual is something that clearly is about this word. And I've heard, back in the day, Hamza's Dan, Zakir Naik, a lot of these Dawah people, they'll tell you like, oh, the purpose of your life is basically to revolve your life, your daily affairs around the 5 prayers. The most happy, most stable Muslim is the one that has their prayers just on autopilot. Like everything, it just flows for the prayers. And I thought to myself, I guess there is some tranquility in something like prayer. But the problem is that this is a very specific set of actions. It's not the idea of prayer in any way. In fact, most of it is not even calling to God at all. It's just going through the motions of something that, had there been chains on the person doing that, you'd probably look at it differently. But imagine if the chains were unseen. Imagine if these positions that are done willingly, not to mention all the added shirk involved in the actual monologue there. The Quran is basically a means to an end for this prayer ritual, because the whole purpose of the Quran is reduced to a set of lines that you have to give to get through the prayer ritual 5 times a day, minimum. You don't need the Quran for any guidance because you have traditions passed down through Chinese whispers for basically everything. And it explains whatever the Quran is supposed to have said. So you don't even have to read it other than to collect bonus points, because the purpose of the Quran is essentially to validate these spoken, undocumented whispers. And they're all attributed to people you've never met that you have to believe in, and there's just absolutely no way that could have been interrupted at any point. Like someone, possibly being forced to memorize something at gunpoint. Anyway, you see a lot of the older buildings, they do have some kind of, I guess, more practical purpose than just simply a house of worship. A lot of them have been refurbished to represent the religion that's dominant in what cities those buildings are in today. But I've been around, a bunch of cities in Europe and other places, and it doesn't appear to me that there is much difference really amongst the architecture, materials used to make these buildings, where they will have these types of prayers. And the Islamic ones in particular it just almost seems like if your entire life is based on doing these positions, right? Almost akin to yoga, and yoga does have its spiritual consequences on the person who does that. Doesn't it feel a little bit too coincidental that apparently these buildings are supposed to harness energy. They call them generators, they call them antiquitech, harvesting energy from the ether. And I was under the impression that this was from the sky, from the heavens, and that's why they built them very tall. I'm sure that there is some truth to that. But what if the energy was actually from the people inside? And perhaps we don't even know, actually, if human beings went into these buildings and needed to do these prayers because there were other beings, non-humans, that simply did this for humans to have their city powered. It sounds a bit fanciful, but this is the nature of our world, is we just don't know what to believe. But we do know the things in the Qur'an are true, that, humans have interacted with jinn for a long time, pretty much since the beginning. And would it be any surprise if these rituals are something that they literally have done as they have coexisted with humanity? Their bodies are fire. They seem to literally power things. We are using them all the time as this smart technology, digital technology, without realizing it. Would it be that much of a stretch if you had the actual life form gathering together 5 times a day in these buildings, and they're all over the place, to power these cities without wires, without cables, so everyone can have lights? And it's just interesting to me that this is something that's, like, it sounds like a battery, the way that they're stacked in rows. It's absolutely essential that you replicate the motions of something that did happen in the past that likely was not for humans. Why? If humans ever did anything similar to this, I really wonder what was the intended purpose. It's not that it's impossible that prayer doesn't have a practical purpose, definitely does, that people can definitely pray in groups if they want to. But I just wonder, why the mandate? Why the mandate on something like that? Does this just strengthen the community? Yeah, perhaps. But there are many ways to strengthen communities. One of which is to respect the needs of the individual so that they can respect the needs of the community. So everyone is heard. Jinn do not operate like that. They are servants, and they do this easily. You don't have to wonder about your phone having a personality. You don't have to wonder about, you just use AI, you just use the internet. It's just a thing that you can use and exploit. It's a service. Humans are not a service. They're not slaves. So again, what's the salat thing? Seems to be an energy, seems to be a force. That's why Allah transfers this energy to the believers. The angels transfer this energy. That's why we are taught to give this energy to the messenger. That's why we describe, peace being upon you, salat being upon you, in the same breath. But it's reduced to this ritual because this is probably the most common occurrence of this energy transfer. And imagine if humans are replaced in the positions jinn used to hold. What would that mean? Would that mean that we are now the subservient class, the second-class citizens, and our leaders are shayateen?